Good morning and welcome to this week's webinar, the Taming the Polar Bears webinar series. The topic today is related to the presentation I put up online on Thursday. Webinar series. Hang on, I've got a technical issue here. The topic today is related. There we go, sorry. I have two computers going. One is what I look at and what I'm as I'm recording, and the other one is sort of a studio monitor, so I know what you guys are looking at. Okay, sorry. So on the stress response system and depression. Now, in my talk the other day, my presentation, I made a couple of mistakes and omissions. I have to clear those up first. You might recall I talked about the triune brain, and this is in the blog post. I talk about this in several blog posts, actually. But anyways, the neurologist who came up with this little model, his name is Dr. Paul MacLean, not Dr. Paul Triune. I got that mixed up in my head when I was talking. So that was the mistake. The omission, the kind of a sort of an important omission. When we look at these three areas, I kind of forgot to emphasize how standard equipment this is in the animal world. Just about all mammals, well, all mammals, not just about all mammals, and we won't worry about other creatures in the animal world for now. We'll just talk about the animal family, or the mammal family. All mammals will have something with these three components. So this, in a sense, is very, very standard equipment throughout the mammal world, from little mice. This is why mice, various mammals, are used so much in neuroscience research, because a lot of the basic layout is virtually identical. So, when we look at it in a touch more detail, all these various little components down here in the limbic region, these are, again, identical throughout the mammal world. Every mammal will have some version. The only thing that changes is the proportions, but the same basic system is present throughout the mammal world. And somehow I forgot to bring my little flow chart, but that's okay. The flow chart I showed last week, where we start with stressors at the top, and then those go through the amygdala, and then other various components of the stress response system. Those are all identical throughout the mammal world. And the importance of that, people, is a lot of our stress response, the actual neurobiology of it is identical throughout most of the animal world, the mammal world. So that's where, when we hear about a lot of the research, that's, oh, here's Mrs. Bean. Hang on, sorry. She can sort of forget where her rear end is. we don't need to look at Mrs. Bean's bum. Okay, so the limbic region and the stress response system and what's going to go on in there is really quite identical throughout the mammal world. And what separates mammals, all mammals, will be this wonderful neocortex, and some things now down here in the brain stem. I kind of, down in the brain stem, I omitted some key things. Now I said down here is really basic stuff: heartbeat, breathing, your urge to swallow, that kind of thing is all down in the brain stem. but also what's down there is some really deep instincts. And these instincts, again, regardless of the mammal, will be remarkably similar. And when you hear, you know, a lot of what you hear about stress response is fight, flight, or freeze, the three Fs. And those instincts down here, mostly in the brainstem, you know, and again, because we share this basic hardware with most of the animal world, but the mammal world especially. You know, a lot of what happens in a stress response, the actual nuts and bolts of it down here is remarkably similar. What changes, what we see in different animal worlds is, well, we'll go back to this one. You know, the actual response. So there'll be a stress response, fight, flight, flee, and then where all the variation comes out, the observable actions we see throughout the different animal worlds and mammal worlds will be learned strategies, and that's where this our fancier neocortex comes in play. And humans ostensibly have some fancier equipment up in the prefrontal cortex, this part right here. This is, you know, if we were, if we were kind of to draw a line there, from here back, we are, there's not a lot of separation between us and well, most primates, certainly, and a lot of other creatures in the animal world. You know, all the higher advanced human strategies and actions are supposed to take place up here, but if you observe people, as all people do, you'll notice this doesn't get engaged a lot often. We'll see, and it's easy to laugh at other people, but the truth is we all do that. You know, regardless of status, when we're having a quote unquote brain fart, for example, you know, there for some reasons our higher functions weren't engaging, and when we're having more hair trigger responses, this is more in control. So a lot of what we do in taming the polar bears, and you know, it's not exclusive to taming the polar bears, like I just invented all this stuff, but all the strategies I kind of gathered, and I'm still gathering. You know, I just kind of put it under the umbrella of the polar bears. Jeepers, I'm forgetting my own stuff. The polar bears difference-making fundamentals, positive difference-making fundamentals. All of that, it is kind of boils down to calming down all the stuff that goes down here, and learning to use this more. You know, up here is where emotional regulation is, where kind of long-term strategies, strategizing. You know, when we, you know, this whole stress response system kind of boils down to, you know, we'll just make it really, really simple for now. There's a problem. The problem, you know, might be an immediate threat, kind of a bubbling, long-term threat. Those threats, problems, let me get my other paper here. You know, they're going to boil down to something regarding food, shelter, resources, or social life. And I know that sounds kind of overly simplified, but if you think of any one of your problems, you know, you're lonely, you don't have love or a mate or something, that's social. You don't have money, you don't have, well, today's world, resources kind of boils down to money. So that's, you know, this problem. You know, if you don't have resources, then you need people. So that comes back to social. You need some kind of help. That comes down to social. And as I said in the presentation, you know, our brains, you know, their number one jobs are survival. Survival comes down to food, shelter, avoiding threat and injury, and procreation, which comes back to social. So, you know, you can look at anything going on in your life, and and it will boil down to one of these things. And as I said in the presentation, you know, we don't think of threat and injury when we're stressed out, but when we're stressed out, there's some kind of threat or injury going on with one of these, or maybe all four of these elements. You know, I've been there. It's stressful. Now, when I say injury, you know, when we're talking about this, you know, modern human creature that we are in our wild and wacky and confused and seemingly crazy world, you know, injury, you know, we can look at injury in a lot of different ways. Like when we have a tumor, let's say a cancerous tumor of some kind, you know, that's not like a knife wound type injury, but that's kind of essentially some kind of wound that's damaging our body, upsetting everything in our mind and body that's growing from the inside. So there's that kind of injury, some kind of physical injury. But I am going to tie these, this general concept of injury into psychological injuries. And you will recall, you know, when we were talking about stressors, psychological pain, that's kind of what I'm talking about. This is going to create an injury response in the stress response system that's going to cascade through our minds and bodies very, very similarly to a physical injury. Okay, so those are kind of things I didn't really make clear enough when we were kind of understanding the basic layout of the brain. What else did I miss? I forgot to bring my little flow chart for all the things. Oh, well, sorry, we'll use this. Now I talk. This is the hypothalamus. I mispronounced it. Well, one of the hazards of just reading and all the time and not really engaging in spoken conversation, you mispronounce a lot of words. You say them in your head one way, but they're pronounced another way. Anyways, hypothalamus. You know, I talked about her about being dispatch lady, as dispatching. She's kind of the main trigger for dispersing lots of stress response, neurobiological stuff. And I know that doesn't sound very sophisticated, but the list is very long. But we're basically talking about stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisoids, glucocortisoids, all kinds of big fancy words and things like that. You know, I kind of characterized her as this dispatch lady, and that's true. And if you recall the amygdala, I characterized that as monitor lady. She's monitoring all this income data for danger and emotional content and things like that. But what I kind of left out, there's sort of more important roles to the hypothalamus than what I got to the other day. And I know this sounds dreadfully boring and mundane. Trust me, this is all going to come back. We'll understand all this stuff much better. This is, you know, when you're going through all this stuff, whatever your stuff is, you know, all this depression, anxiety, emotional stuff, you know, this is like I say, this is ground zero for where all that happens. So when we want to understand, our symptoms and what's going on and what to do, then a little better understanding of all this is well, in my view, and then this has been my polar bear's view since day one, if we understand why and what's going on, some of the basics, we can understand what to do and why that's important. Often we get told what to do and it makes no sense to us. We don't understand why, so we don't do it. But if we understand, oh, that's why, okay, I'm all over that. Sign me up. What do I do? It just kind of makes it a lot easier. Okay, so amygdala, monitor lady, she monitors outside stuff. And a really, really important thing I forgot to mention about the hypothalamus is that little part is a huge, amygdala is outside stuff. The hypothalamus is inside stuff. She monitors everything that's going on in mostly our bodies, but also what's going on in our mind. When we want to understand psychological stressors, the hypothalamus is monitoring a lot what's going on there as well. And when we get into a stress response for no physical reason, no outside threat, seemingly no direct threat, this is going to be what's going on in our mind and body that we're sort of not aware of. When I talk about deep subconscious systems kind of running our ships, our behaviors and actions, this is the hypothalamus is quite a key player. Now, to give you an idea of what that does and what that monitors, we talked about our tactile sensations, and so let's think of an easy example there. We're in a room and it gets cold. We sense this. We may or may not be aware of that. That's the sense. We feel the sensations throughout our body. That sends a message, cold. That it's the hypothalamus that senses that and monitors that, and consciously or unconsciously we'll do something about that. We'll turn up the heat. We'll put on a sweater. When we get really cold, we start to shiver. This is, we've gone way past the point of where we should have taken action, and we're starting to shiver and show physiological symptoms. And this is the hypothalamus that's involved in that, and what to do. So, these are really kind of simple, low-level stressors. Something as simple as temperature. On the opposite side, it gets too hot. We start to sweat. The hypothalamus is involved in that. Hypothalamus, I talked about the amygdalas being quite subdivided, and a lot of our individual differences in how we respond physiologically and psychologically to stuff depends on how the amygdala is structured, and it's the same with the hypothalamus. We all have one. You die, you go in and they open you up. Everybody's going to have a hypothalamus, but as I like to say, the devil is in the details. We all get a hypothalamus, but there's an enormous amount of variation in how it's actually structured and how it responds to this or that. So if you're sensitive to the cold or sensitive to heat, sensitive to those kinds of things, that's going on in your hypothalamus. Now you are sitting there wondering, what in the hell does this have to do with depression? and that's a good question, and I know that's probably on your minds. It would be on my mind, I know that. You know, I might have to duck out and find my other thing. It's kind of handy. But all these things are related, as I pointed out in the broadcast the other day. You know, there's massive feedback loops, and so what can happen? And you know, and again, this is why I talk about, you know, brain operations way below our conscious level. Something might be going on in the hypothalamus, and it's getting thrown out of balance and shooting hormones this way and that way, and you know, we feel too hot, we feel too cold. Women will get this. You know, the male and female hypothalamuses operate a little differently and do different things, and all the related things, pituitary glands and all this stuff. And you know, we don't know what's going on. Maybe we don't know what's going on, but it's creating discomfort, and we're getting upset. And because we're not precisely understanding what's going on, we get more upset. And because all these systems are related, these are all tied together. You know, something as seemingly straightforward and simple as an upset monitor lady, interior systems monitor lady, the hypothalamus, might create a cascade of other things going on. You know, we're just, you know, back to our simple analogy, you know, our body's upset because we're not, you know, comfortable with the temperature. And, you know, and you know, nothing's going on. You're just sitting there watching TV, and all of a sudden you're upset. This starts to activate the amygdala and all kinds of other things. Next thing you know, you're grumpy and bitching at your partner, and the next thing you know, there's a huge argument, and this cascades into all kinds of other stuff. You know, just because our hypothalamus was kind of upset about the room temperature and wasn't getting satisfied. So, you know, all these things are interrelated. And, you know, when we want to understand what's going on and why we are seemingly, you know, so hard to please, or so hard to get into some kind of, you know, state where we're quote unquote happy, you know, a lot of deep unconscious stuff, deep subconscious stuff, way down here in the real base of our whole operations here in our head. You know, sometimes just really basic, simple things like that are wrong. But we misidentify them, you know, because our conscious experience is way up here. You know, our conscious experience tends to blame something else, you know, the person we're with or something. So, you know, when we're trying to sort all these things out, it does become kind of important to understand what's going on way down here. Okay, so that kind of clears that up. Oh, sorry, the last thing that was, you know, what I'm talking about with the hypothalamus, there is a state, a physiological and psychological state that falls under the general umbrella of the term homeostasis, and I'm probably mispronouncing that as well, but anyways, homeostasis is a Greek term that kind of means harmony, balance. You know, we're not too far this way, we're not too far that way. In our temperature analogy, you know, we're not too hot, we're not too cold, we're just kind of in this comfort zone. If you can imagine a comfort zone, you know, you're in, I don't know, some kind of place, and you know, this is wildly variable among people. You're not feeling stressed, you're feeling calm. Things are, you know, quote unquote, just right. You're content. That is homeostasis. That is, you know, when we're in homeostasis, that means all these little stress response things are just on standby. They're just all and we experience that up in our conscious mind. We experience that as happiness, contentment, and all kinds of blah 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 stuff. You can see this whole concept of homeostasis through all kinds of thought systems and religious systems. There'll be all kinds of different ways to represent that. This is my favorite representation. I spent years and years in Asia, and kind of I got deeply influenced by Asian thought systems, Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, things like that. Anyways, this is a very Chinese concept. This is the yin and the yang. Yin is, shoot, I'm like, sorry, I've got those backwards. The yin and the yang. Yang is lightness, yin is darkness, and you'll see this whole concept of light and dark all throughout Chinese philosophies and thought systems and approach to life, philosophies and so on. And this is all about balance. This thing, I don't know what it's called in English. I know the Chinese word bagua, which I'm probably mispronouncing as well. But anyways, it boils down to balance. It boils down to this homeostatic state that we all want to be in. That's the holy grail, you know, way down in the, you know, again, if we're looking at all this stress and stress response stuff, the technical term used in all people who study and teach stress response and all this stuff. Homeostasis is a big thing throughout the study of chemistry and physics and all these other things. And it's all about kind of creating some sort of, not that way, but sort of a middle space. And that, people, is sort of the nuts and bolts and the whole, well, we'll just call it the holy grail of taming your polar bears. When we have polar bears, all these wild emotional states and aggression and anger and upset and sadness and all the stuff this way and that way, those are the polar bears. And we want to tame them. What we are really seeking is some sort of homeostasis, some sort of comfort zone, some sort of, I'm okay. Things are okay. Okay. Now, oh boy, I'm really getting long in the tooth here again. There are all kinds of other things I wanted to get to. I've already babbled on for close to half an hour. And this is supposed to be about questions and answers, but hopefully that stimulated some more questions. You know, all about all this. You know, everything I talk about is giving you a different version and footing for understanding you and what's going on. And that is supposed to spur questions. You know, I tell you all these things. You probably never thought of them in this way before, maybe, but probably not. And if so, this is a little different or deeper or whatever than you've looked at these things before. Anyways, hopefully this is spurring some thought and questions. Now the question and answer period, it could be about these specific things I'm talking about, or it could be, you know, any of the positive difference making fundamentals that I'm trying to teach and get you guys to do. So I am going to shut up. And I've got some backup questions from email and other sources if it comes down to that. But I'm going to shut up and put the mic over to you guys if you can ask some questions. Again, if you, which way? Oh, I got to go this way. Down here is, no, it's this way. Down here, there's a little kind of a chat box thing. It says live chat to the your right of the screen. Live chat, taming the polar bear, say something. You just type it in there, I'll see it. Okay? So let's put the field open to questions. Now I need my little music, or I need Mrs. Bean here to entertain us. So I'm going to wait for some questions. You guys should know, if you don't ask questions, I'll start talking again. You'll lose your chance to ask questions. So yeah, probably while I'm going to try work this out a little better. This is, I think, only our third time for doing this, and we are kind of, it's a new experience for me, it's a new experience for you, and we're kind of just trying to get this to work better for all of us. Okay, not seeing any questions. This actually worked really well a few weeks ago. I got some really good questions. Okay, I'm going to fall back on a question I received in email. Now, I have all my positive difference-making fundamentals, and I just posted a fabulous new post on the this neuroscience of music therapy, and I had all kinds of really cool brain illustrations in there, and what music does to the brain, and an enormous amount of that. The whole point of music therapy for me is calming all these areas down so they respond less. Well, we're not going to stop them from responding. We don't want that either. We want them to respond less impulsively, less intensely, less, quote unquote, emotionally. Emotion can be a crying outburst, an anger, shouting outburst. It's all emotions, and it all gets us into trouble. So music therapy is about calming a lot of this stuff down. And in that post, I said, if we design your music therapy program right, it's not going to only alter all kinds of connections throughout our more fancier things up here. It's going to alter things way down here in the hippocampus and the amygdala especially. So I got a question about music therapy, seemingly unrelated, but absolutely related. And she asked, how did it go? It was something, is it better to wear headphones? I think. And, I have, I'm going to do a video presentation on music therapy and a whole webinar like this, question and answer webinar on music therapy, but it's okay if we jump ahead a little bit. If you guys won't ask any questions, just fire away. Don't be shy, fire away, ask it. Well, like I said last week, it's impossible for you to ask a bad question. There is no such thing as a bad question. So while you guys are thinking about questions to ask, I'm going to address this question about headphones for music therapy. Headphones are just kind of a practical reality for a world where people live close together with others or among others. And I'm really blessed now. I have a place. I have a really nice stereo that it's 30 years old, most of it, more than 30 years old, but I've kept it in top-notch condition, and I can listen to that in a space by myself. And I can put on music and I can dance and sing and go crazy. And I'm going to talk about that in the music when we talk more about music therapy. But the reality for most people is they can't do that. So, and this is why the headphone and earbud industry is so big. So as it so happens, I was thinking about precisely this sort of thing yesterday or the day before. You know, how do we listen to music? And headphones, like I say, is just kind of a practical reality. And headphones, you know, I listen to music all kinds, well, not all kinds of ways, two ways, through my stereo and the speakers, and then it's, you know, a surrounding, you know, atmosphere thing. But other times I wear my headphones. And headphones, I think sometimes, many times, you know, even if I or we have the option of turning on the stereo or the radio or whatever and having music in the room around us, I think headphones are the pardon me, the better way to go for music therapy. Because you know, part of music therapy does a lot of things, but we can kind of look at it as, you know, most of us would tend to think of it this way. It's a way to deal with stress. You know, we can have fun with music, and that gives us an outlet for you know, de-stressing, decompressing, blah, blah, blah. But it's also kind of an escape. Well, not kind of, it is an escape. A lot of times when we're listening to music, we're escaping from the world around us. And, you know, we don't want to make too much of a habit of that. That becomes a whole different issue in itself. But the reality is, you know, we all need that escape. And headphones block out so much of what's going on. If you're in a you know, kind of a busy city area, you know, you know, if I think of my Taming the Polar Bears viewers and followers, pure statistics will the probability that you live in a city is pretty high. The probability that you live somewhere where you can't listen to music on a loud stereo like you would like to is pretty high. So, and then you're going to be surrounded by noise, traffic noise from the outside, household noise, and headphones blocks all that out. And there's a really cool product. They're noise canceling earbuds and headphones. And that's kind of voodoo magic to me. I have no idea how those work, but apparently they work fabulously. And, you know, when we're talking about stress and stressors, you know, I talked about this, when did I talk about this? Last week, I guess. You know, like so much of, you know, what stresses us out is noise. It comes into our ears and gets processed by our auditory cortex, and messages go down here, and it creates all kinds of stuff. You know, noise is a well understood stressor. You know, it's basically upsetting this homeostasis place we want to be in. So, you know, headphones, you know, yeah, absolutely. Headphones can block out. And I'm going to ask you not to be angry about the noise. You know, one of the things we're going to learn is to not be angry about things that just happen in the world. You're setting yourself up for a lifetime of anger and agony if you're going to get upset about things in the world that are outside your control or that you don't like. So we're going to take a non-judgmental way of thinking about this noise. There's something going on, traffic noise, some kind of people noise, and we're not going to get upset about that, because that'll help us reduce stress right there. But anyways, it's irritating, and that's absolutely okay. You know, absolutely noise is irritating, especially if you have all kinds of things going on. When you have all kinds of things going on, this just kind of gets generally, for no specific reason, all hell will break loose down here, and it'll just create stress and anxiety and all kinds of stuff. So we want to eliminate one of these stress sources, noise. So we put on our headphones, that helps block out the noise. And then we put on some kind of music. And I'm going to talk about that some kind of music when we get into music therapy. Okay, so that's probably a longer answer than anyone would have expected, but it is kind of important to understand these things, why we do them. Okay, I'm still not seeing any questions. Mrs. Bean to the rescue. Here she is. Oh, better off alone. Oh, now it's retracted. I see somebody put in a question, something about better off alone. And then it says the message was retracted. And I'm going to assume that that's regards to music therapy, better off alone. And yes and no. I need my little, Mrs. Bean's making things difficult over here. Music is a lot of things. It absolutely can be an individual experience, and that's very important, no question. But music is also what brings us together. Now, when I talk about the social stuff, social stressors, and this again is a whole different topic I will get deeply into. Loneliness and isolation, regardless of whether you think you are an introvert or all these kind of things we create to sort of explain being alone. Regardless of where you are on the introvert to extrovert scale, we are social animals. There is no person who doesn't need socialization to some degree. So, a lot of our habits, and we seldom think about why we fall into the habits and lifestyles we do. Well, that's not true. We do think this is an enormous cause of anxiety, but we end up not thinking about them in the right way or thinking about the right things. A lot of these habits and lifestyles we fall into will almost invariably have something to do with how we fit into the social world. We move towards it or we move away from it. And a lot of isolation and loneliness is kind of a long, lifelong process that probably started in childhood. That for a wide variety of reasons we can't get in here today, end up with a person at some stage of their life feeling lonely and isolated. That is absolutely going to cause pain. How you deal with that pain will vary greatly. Now, all this ties back to music. Music, it is, one of the greatest powers of music. It is a unifying force. And this is, I'm glad this came up, because this is when I talk about music therapy. Music therapy can mean a lot of things. But, and I mentioned this a little bit in my post, the introductory post on music therapy. A big part of what music can do, and I believe should do for you, should be part of what you are going to get out of music therapy, and how music therapy is going to calm down and deal with a lot of these stressors. You know, there's the independent experience that's really important for various reasons I'll get into when we specifically address this topic. But and equally important, in my view, is the socialization aspect. You know, if we look at the history of music, you know, throughout human history, the vast majority of music was a shared experience. This individual kind of isolated experience of music is sort of a 20th century, 21st century now phenomenon. And there's a whole kind of a sociological thing I'm going to get to someday about how we ended up with so many people so lonely and isolated, but not today. But you know, part of our music experience has to be a shared experience. And I'm, you know, for people who have kind of become used to being isolated and have created all kinds of mental models for that. And you know, and isolation and loneliness is a big part of their depressed states. You know, somehow we have to figure out a way for you to socialize, be with more people, and be with people in a comforting kind of way. So, you know, this is kind of a longer term strategy for many people. But, you know, you know, somebody said listening to music better off alone. Yeah, absolutely it is. But part of the strategy has to be somehow creating shared experience. You know, this is the fundamental basis for humanity and all people, regardless of you know how you think you feel about that. This is the you know, it's the evolutionary fact. It's just, you know, every fact to do with the human experience and human beings. It is, you know, at some point has to have shared experience. We're just, when I say deeply wired for stuff, that is kind of non-negotiable. You know, we are all deeply wired for that. Now I'm getting some questions. Yes. I find it impossible to experience music without emotion. What to do about that? Now, this is a fantabulous question, because, you know, again, this is what music therapy, and again, you know, this is a whole different thing for when I talk about music therapy specifically. But you know, my whole point of music therapy is it gives us a tool, a method, and you know, kind of a space away from the world where we can deal on rewiring and rejigging all this. Now, the question asks, I find it impossible to experience music without emotion. What to do about that? Because the emotions will have to do with memories that are upsetting. Like this is absolute gold, and this is exactly what we want to talk about and do with music therapy. Okay, so we have this issue. You know, let's remove the music part of it and just think of it as sound coming in. These sounds get processed. The sounds go through the amygdala and the hippocampus kind of simultaneously. The hippocampus is where these emotions, the upsetting emotions, are stored. And again, the amygdala and the hippocampus work very closely together for memory and emotional content. So what's happening, people, I need another diagram, but I don't have one. Anyway, I'll use my head. So you know, we have this sound, and you know, it's not just musical sounds. It could be all kinds of sounds. Let's just break it down to sounds. It could be a person's voice. It could be a car horn. It's some sort of sound. That sound's going to come through our auditory cortex, the equipment that takes all these sounds and organizes that and shoots it down to the amygdala. You know, the sound, the amygdala's, you know, the sound goes down there. The amygdala sorts out, you know, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do with this? It asks the hippocampus, you know, what memories are going on. This is all happening in like a hundredths of a second. And this sound creates some kind of difficult emotional response. You know, this is very common for all kinds of sounds, all kinds of emotions, and all kinds of reasons. But this is one of the things that starts to build the prisons and the cages we live in. You know, when I hear and talk to people about living with anxiety and depression and these different things, you will very often hear some kind of cage or prison analogy, and that's you know, really part of the tragedy of conditions like anxiety and depression when they're not treated. And this is what's going on. You know, something. You know, and again, I talk about two people having the same experience. You know, one person is listening to the exact same music, and they're happy. You know, they might be a couple, but they have some entirely different experience and emotional attachment to something that's really, you know, the music, it's just sound. It has no real value in itself. It's just a sound. The value, what the emotional response, happy this way and some kind of emotional upset that way, that is an individual subjective response. And that individual subjective response is generated down here due to the individual differences down here that I talked about. Oops. And all this, oops, that's upside down, and all this wildly complex wiring. And this is exactly what I use music therapy to deal with. Now I'm going to tie in the mindfulness, meditation, cognitive behavior therapy. You know, because if we don't deal with this, we'll always be a prisoner of it. If it's not this song, it's that song. And you know, so we take something that's, you know, should be so beautiful, and we're kind of held hostage by, you know, these emotional triggers. And, you know, and I used to go through this all the time, still can. And I used to refer to it as, you know, walking through a minefield. And, you know, and all these triggers, whether it's some kind of song or what somebody says or something we see that creates some sort of really intense emotional reaction, in psychological parlance, those are triggers. And I used to liken them to going through a minefield. And you're just, you know, and you don't know the minefields there, you know, you're just walking along, and you hit some kind of emotional trigger, a song or somebody's voice, perfume, could be all kinds of things. And it's like, and it triggers some sort of intense emotional response, and it's like stepping on a minefield. Stepping on a mine that you didn't know was there, and then all of a sudden, boom, and you're blown up in this terrible emotional place, and you know, you're sucked back down into some kind of really horrible, anxious, emotional, depressed state. You know, where we started off kind of okay, and you know, and again, that becomes the prison that the cage. That we you know, we literally become imprisoned. I've been there. It's no way to live. And you know, so these are things we have to deal with. And, you know, I actually had a note here. Hang on. Now I'm going to get away from the actual question and sort of adjust, you know, the underlying thing that's going on there and what we're creating. I talked about the stress response. You know, all what the questioner is asking about. This is stress response. This is classic stress response stuff, psychological stress response stuff. Some kind of input, sound channels in, goes through the amygdala, hippocampus. There's some kind of intense emotional content, memory. And that sets off this cascade of stress response, neurobiology and reaction and all this stuff. And this is a classic case, a classic example of a psychological stressor. And the psychological stressor has no objective value attached to it. It's a subjective experience. It's neither here nor there. It's just for this particular person, and we're all like this. We all have different psychological stressors, but we have this psychological stressor that creates very real physiological symptoms. And, and this is really a lot what I was talking about when I introduced the stress response system and tried to emphasize, if we don't understand these things from a psychological point of view, and if we don't understand them from the physiological neurobiology point of view, we're not going to understand what's going on. So, a psychological trigger like this, in this case, some kind of music or song, and this response, we are absolutely looking at something psychological, and we're absolutely looking at something physiological, and they're both real. We can't say this is not real. We can't say this is not real. We can't say, we can't dismiss either one, which is what 99% of people will do, right? So now this whole thing, psychological aspects to stress and biological aspects to stress. And I had a note here somewhere. Yes, here we go. This prison, this sense of being trapped. Everybody will experience that in a number of ways. They will be put there for a number of reasons, their life experiences and reactions. But what that place is, and it's not a good place. You try to accept it and deal with it, but it's not a good place. Holy cow, we're almost out of time here. I'll just wrap this up really quickly right here. What all these things do, we get more and more closed in. This is this cage. I could write my own personal cage story. We all kind of can. This prison is in, and nobody's going to like this term, I know. It's a place of learned helplessness. Now, learned helplessness is 90 people outside of a few neurobiology, neuroscience-y kind of people will misunderstand that term. So I'm just going to put this out there. Don't I'm getting another question here. We'll get to that. Don't worry. We're not going to solve everything right here, right now. I'll get to the next question. But this learned helplessness boils down to you can take any animal and it applies to every human being. When I say learned helplessness, this is not something unique to any individual, okay? Your situation, your circumstances will have their own individual flavors and your own personal life experiences. But when we're in this kind of cage, and we're in this place, you know, we kind of stuck. We don't know what to do. It's the term is learned helplessness, and just let's not attach any psychological meaning to that. But it's, and I'm going to have to explain this another day. But it just means, you know, we need solutions. All of these stress responses want some kind of action and some kind of solution where we're going to reach, you know, this balance, this homeostatic state. And learned helplessness, you know, if we boil that experiment down to its essence, and there's all kinds of interesting little animal experiments and models for this. You know, we need the solution. We go that way. We experience a negative, painful thing. You know, an animal experience, they use some kind of electric shock or something. And so we try to go back the other way. And you know, that doesn't work either, because we still need this solution. But every time we reach for the solution, we experience some kind of pain, some kind of intense emotion, something. And so what ends up happening is, you know, we're in no man's land. We're just stuck. We're not moving towards solutions. We're not going back to a comfort zone. Because where we need to be is on the other side of this pain. And that's where this prison, this psychological prison, kind of, you know, if we, you know, kind of took away all the individual details and circumstances, you know, where we are is actually, you know, the term for it, and it's, I know it's not the best term, but it's kind of the reality of it, is this learned helplessness. And that's where we you know, we feel this need to go this way. You know, we want, you know, more social connections of some kind. We need, you know, these things in our life kind of solved, or something to happen there to put us in a better place. But every time we try that, we meet with some kind of pain, some kind of defeat, and we end up in this stuck place, and that's this prison. And, you know, back to the question, you know, can't experience music without emotion. You know, that's a big part of what's putting us back there. Okay, so time is up. Holy cow, can I rip through an hour or what? Listen, thanks. You know, there's some people who very, very kindly and graciously took an hour or some part of their day out to sit here and listen to me talk about my polar bear stuff. Actually, I know that's not true. I know you guys really just want to see Mrs. Bean. Let's be honest here. But anyways, I'm just really, really grateful and humbled that you took some time out of your day to hear this. I hope this is helpful. Now, I know, you know, you're out there, but what are the answers, damn it? But you know, answers are, you know, I can say there's, you know, we can boil these things down, but you know, there's little individual aspects of how answers work for each person. So I'm sorry we can't have all the answers right now. To answer the question, I want to know how to stop it or handle it. That is doable. You know, what we're going to do in that case is combine music therapy, the experience of listening to music, with excuse me, with the cognitive behavior, you know, mindfulness cognitive behavior therapy. So when you're experiencing this reaction to some kind of outside stimuli, we have to work on that, and you'll use the techniques you use in mindfulness cognitive behavior therapy. You know, the thing is happening. It could be thoughts or some kind of outside experience, all kinds of things, and you're going to learn to push back on that and question. Okay, that's the shortest answer I can give you for now. You have the skills and the tools. You just need to apply them in a different way. So but again, this is ongoing thing. We're every week we're going to discuss something a little differently, a little new. Like I said, it's just impossible to address all these things at once in one little session. It'd be wonderful if it worked that way, but it doesn't. Okay, so I'm 4 minutes over time. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Go to Taming the Polar Bears. That's why I put a lot of that. That's why it's all out on the blog. A lot of the answers are there. You kind of got to look for them yourselves a little bit. And I'll get up more and more talks and presentations like this. I promise I'll get better at them, get them more time efficient and so on. But now I was also going to mention something else. I do work privately with people. If you write to tamingthepolarbears@gmail.com, you can address questions or ask about working privately there. Okay, so thanks again. Over and out. We will see you same time, same place next week. Bye now.